So I'm Nick Salmon, and Frank Locker and Gabriel Diago and I created PBL Plus a number of years ago. And we decided that it was time to share our vision with the world. And so we thought we'd do it in a relatively memorable way, which was to do a global trot around the world. And so somewhere around 12 hours ago, we began this conversation in the UK, and we've already been to, I think, 6 continents. And we'll hit many of them yet again in the remaining hours ahead. And so I'm really pleased to keep this conversation going. I pointed out a couple hours ago that I thought it was ironic that I am constantly advocating for giving learners big blocks of time to really go into depth and exploration of ideas. And here we are keeping everybody on the, sorry, it's time to move on to the next one. So we're trying to let you share those stories of depth in this setting, and we'll make the most of the time that we have together. Because of the global disruption from COVID-19, people like Juan Carlos in Costa Rica doesn't have access to the students that would often be on site, or other people who would be on site doing that work with him with EPI, Ecology Project International. And I suspect that Liz over in Sandpoint would readily be able to pull some students into the conversation, but again, we're finding some limitations on that. So I ask, as each person shares the story of their organization and their kind of vision of what's possible, that as much as possible, let's bring that student voice forward, even if they're not on screen with us. So, and I think, Juan Carlos, you're going to cover everything for EPI. Is that right? Haley's just there to keep an eye on you. So, okay, good. So I'll turn it over to you, and we'll find a way to weave Liz into the conversation at different times. And we'll take it from there. Again, let's use the chat bar as a place to say, oh, I've got a question, or I've got an insight based on what you just shared. So,
cool. Thank you, Nick.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nick. And any question is really appreciated, so we can have the conversation going. I'm talking in behalf of EPI, Ecology Project International. I'm gonna try to share my screen. And we are, let me see.
At the bottom is the green share screen arrow. There you go.
Yeah, there it is. The thing is that it's moving. Okay, now I have it. And well, we are NGO, and yes, we are a project-based learning project. And what we do here is that our mission is to empower youth to take an active role in conservation. And we do this by creating a partnership between students and scientists that are working on a real ongoing project. So we have like an ongoing project where the students are involved, but as well, we have the students there make their own project while seeing how scientists develop their own. So it's like a pretty cool interaction between scientists and students, where both of them are creating their own thing. EPI, it's around 5 countries. We're working in Yellowstone. We have a project there. We have a program in Galapagos Islands, in Baja California, Mexico, in Belize, and in Costa Rica. And on each side, we have different partners or scientific partners which we work with. We believe that having an immersive experience like this one, where the students get involved in real projects, meaningful scientific data gathering, while getting the ecosystem knowledge, while practicing scientific competences and increasing their environmental dispositions, they're gonna be wanting to be active in conservation. They're gonna think about their own issues or their own ecological problems that they have where they live, and they're gonna start thinking and creating these solutions. And that's what we want. Here is a picture of the sites that we are and the different flagging animals that we research on, or our partners do the research on. So it's Yellowstone with the wolves and the ungulates, Galapagos with the big tortoise, Mexico here some snorkeling and some island ecology, Belize with the reef, and in Costa Rica we have the leatherback sea turtle that is pretty amazing, pretty big, and it's an amazing 25-year-old program where we are researching about the leatherback and walking the beach every night to find this amazing animal and take the data with the students. So on all our programs, we try to use the best tools available to support the students. So it is project-based. We use Inquire, experiential learning. We use service learning, and as many instructional strategies so that our participants may have the best experience, learning, and motivation possible. I'm gonna talk about, well, in EPI I already have around 35,000 or almost 40,000 students that been in the program. This data that I'm showing is more of Costa Rica. We have 5,000 local participants, but almost 10,000 have already been visiting our program here in Costa Rica. But yes, here we are in partnership with the Pacuare Reserve. We used to be partners. Now for the last 5-6 years, we are the stewardships of the reserve, the managers. And this is an amazing site. It's a 2,000 hectares research station where we support ongoing studies on the conservation of the leatherback sea turtle. Here in the picture, you can see how this is the only way to get inside the reserve, and is through the murky waters of the canals of the Caribbean. So it's pretty isolated, but still, it's just an amazing place. And it's not a place where we do only leatherback studies, because it's a big forest place, very important for biodiversity. Costa Rica is a hotspot for biodiversity, and Pacuare is one of the, it's a pretty important place on that hotspots microsite. So we've been studying the leatherbacks, but there's the agami heron, a nesting site that we study. We do big cat studies. So we have camera traps where we've been seeing ocelots, jaguars, all kind of big animals. We have studies on bats. We have studies on monkeys. So it's a pretty wide study area where we get involved the students along the scientists to help them develop their research. And on the same page, the students develop their own mini project right there with the scientists. As I was saying, Costa Rica is a biodiversity hotspot, and here at the reserve, it is pretty important to make that conservation area to be protected and to minimize the effect. Like this is it's a very amazing place where the biodiversity is pretty high. And it's interesting how, for me to see this in this moment of pandemia everywhere, I've seen a lot of notes or advertising or just posts of animals running around in places where the humans used to be. We've seen manatees in the Costa Rica canals. We've seen a puma in a street, and you may think like in this place in the Pacuare Reserve, animals are getting really wild and excited. And it is tricky for us here, because at least for the leatherback turtles, we are in the leatherback season right now. Not having people there reaching out, going with us, going with the scientists out to protect the turtles means not that the turtles are going to be happy laying their eggs alone, but they're going to be unprotected. Most of the beaches in Costa Rica, and especially in the Pacuare Reserve, we have a lot of poaching activities. This is not mean people or people that want to endanger the turtles, but it's people that is trying to find a way to live, and it's a little controversial for us, right? We need to protect as many eggs as possible, and if we are not able to go to the beach, then the turtle is unprotected, and this gives us like a weird sense, because we've seen all kind of animals going into civilian areas, and for us it's not the same here. We actually want people, well, not right now, because we need to, everybody needs to be staying at home, but we are lacking of that manpower, of those students going to the beach to help protect the turtles, to help us get the data that we need, to help us move the eggs to the hatchery, and this is one of the major issues that we are, as an organization, are having. Here I can show you some pictures of the Pacuare Reserve, of the area. This is one of the last year's Andres giving an outside classroom. We usually don't let the kids sit down that much, so he's kind of like giving the intro, and then they're gonna start running their own projects. But it's a picture to show up like the scenery that we use. There's the boat ride, and the beach, and the forest that we have over there. When the kids arrive to the reserve, this is not a real turtle. This is a sand turtle. But this is what we start with the students doing, figuring out what is the data that they are going to be taking at night, how to do it, and just trying to explore with them why are these measuring important, why are they, how can we use them if they have the data, because we provide the data to them, like the database. What can they do with this data, and then hands-on put them to work. The leatherback turtles nest at night. So here we can see a group of students. They don't actually have the turtle right there, but they are taking but they are, the site where the turtle was laying their eggs is not the best, or is insecure. So the students over there is helping the research assistant taking the nest to a safer place. And over here we have almost in the morning picture that we're able to have. Sometimes we have a hard time getting pictures of what the students are doing and how they're doing their research projects, and what they're doing at night with the sea turtle. So this is a picture that of a time when the turtle was laying their eggs almost at dawn, and we were able to take this kind of pictures, and you can see the students there taking a look at how the turtle is making the nest. We do have a protocol that we let the turtle lay their eggs, and once she finished laying the eggs, then the students with the research assistant can go ahead and take the bio measurement, so we don't disturb the turtle. This is the hatchery that we have at Pacuare Reserve. Right now we are in the middle of the sea turtle. We still have research assistants working there. Thank God, thank for them. That it's getting really tough, because the students that EPI take there to be part of the project and help them really make a difference. So now the research assistants that are there, they're kind of stuck because they cannot go. Some of them are from different countries. We have a very international staff and volunteers helping out there. Some don't want to go out to their countries, and they decide to stay. Some others they cannot fly back. But their enthusiasm is amazing, and they're there every night looking for the turtles, and this is the hatchery where we relocate the nest so we can have a better control. Last year we were able to measure the next success of the turtles, and for the nature, the turtles that we leave the nest in situ right there in the nature, there was a 31% success rate. That is, it's pretty normal for the leatherback sea turtle. But if we take the eggs and bring them to the hatchery, we increase that success rate to 69%, almost 70%. So that's a lot of difference, and that's all the efforts that we are continuing doing, but it's been tough. EPI and the Pacuare Reserve gets their funding from these groups that are coming and helping and participating in the conservation and in the research project, and right now it's getting tougher and tougher. I've seen some questions coming, but I'm not sure.
They're mostly from me, so don't keep going.
Okay.
Although I want to pull Rachel into the, no, sorry, Rachel, Liz into the conversation here in a moment. All kinds of challenges, obviously, that you have.
All kind of challenges, and we're doing all kind of things to help out, right? We've been asking for helps. We just started a campaign that is called Every Egg. I think Haley can put the link over there in the chat, and it's try to get help from everywhere in this struggling time. 1 in 1,000 eggs survive to become an adult. So for us, every egg count. We need to do our best to save this species, because it's pretty important in the ecosystem, and it's kind of like this umbrella species for us as well, because it helps us protect the whole forest. So it is pretty important. But then what we do with the students when they're there at night, they go out at night and help the science and the conservation of the sea turtle. But during the day, our educational program, our science program, goes for the students to do their own project, their own research. So once they're inspired and by the effort of the assistants, of the volunteers and of the reserve, we put them hands-on to do their own project. So over here we have some local students researching about pollinators that are on this plant that grows on the beach. And it's interesting because the roots of these plants can go inside the sand and may affect the turtle. So there's a interesting reaction there, but they like the last person that was talking was saying, we don't know where the students are gonna, their project is gonna lead them, and we need to let that curiosity run, and they're there with their curiosity, trying to find out more about the flora of this place. This is pictures of our end of the season event that we have, that is full of other smaller projects that the student develop. I think project base is not only science, but there's music, there's arts, there's always there's so many ways that the students can learn, and we are pretty much science, but we have this twist where we incorporate arts, we incorporate music in all our programs, and just to make it more inclusive. And yeah, we have like local sustainability, we have paintings, we have arts, we have the science fair, and this is the big picture of our campaign that we're running right now. Every egg counts, and looking for support, because we are struggling a little.
Can we pause there and pull Liz in and then continue to kind of collect questions?
Yeah, for sure.
One for you to think about while she's talking is, I know in other areas where there are conflicting issues around wildlife conservation and other local needs, that sometimes, I'll just use the analogy, a mature turtle is worth more to somebody than an egg, a destroyed egg. And so if you can work with local people to convince them that letting all the turtles reach maturity actually would be in their better interest than destroying the habitat that's, or destroying the egg nests and things like that. So anyhow, just think about that. And then Liz, I'm not sure where you are. I assume that if you start to, unless you muted and then I need to unmute you again. Is that, there you go, okay. And I hear lovely bird chatter behind somebody. I'm assuming that's Juan Carlos.
So if I can just share my
not Sandpoint.
Yeah.
So yes.
Perfect. There we go.
Want to share your screen. And so, Elizabeth, all I know is that you have an association with the University of Idaho, that I think you live in Sandpoint, Idaho, and you described your interest in being a PBL connoisseur. And so I don't know what that means exactly. So I'm open to discovering that.
There you go. Well, if that's not a hook, I don't know what is, right? As a good one. What is this all about? You know, I use the word connoisseurship, like Elliot Eisner uses the word connoisseurship, really to, you could say research. So let's, for the next little bit, as we hang out for this brief conversation, think about it as simplifying research. Because we are all, if you think about what connoisseurship means, and I like to define it like this, because I think that it's somewhat simple, the practice of knowing and elevating the best, right?
And you're not yet sharing your screen, if that's what you intend to be doing.
Yes, thank you, perfect. There we go. So really, it's, you know, all about just sharing and knowing and elevating the best. And just like Juan Carlos just described, obviously on the reserve, they know what is working, what's not working as being the best. And they are the connoisseurs of that place. But me, I'm in Idaho, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I really am not at all an expert in that, right? And so if you think about yourself as a connoisseur in project-based learning, place-based learning, and query-driven learning, really when you're putting the person at the center, especially for our students, we really want them to be able to understand and to develop their own abilities to be connoisseurs, right? Along each way, either with the process or the product or whatever. We really want them to know what is the best. And so if I could just have you in for just a brief moment, it's around lunchtime here on Pacific Standard Time. So tap into, what are you a connoisseur of? I'm sorry if you haven't had lunch or dinner, wherever you are, right?
Jim Collins is going to be expelled. Sorry.
Sorry?
I need to deal with this. Remove participant. I'm sorry that this is happening.
Yeah, no problem.
And I'm not sure I can find him this way. Go away, please.
Do you want me to keep going, or should I just wait for a minute?
Yeah, I'm really disturbed by this kind of stuff that happens.
Yeah, no worries.
And unfortunately, I'm not the most savvy person for undoing this thing, because I can't easily find people on my screen and get rid of them. I don't know, Gabrielle, whether you have any help here. I should be able to just see him and get rid of him, but I don't know if anybody can help me find him. because it's not. Oh, come on, people. Leave us alone. Remove participant. But I don't know where they are. I'm sorry, I'm really stuck with not knowing how to operate the security because I can't find the person. I ought to be able to manage participants, find this person and remove them, but that's not happening. And I just don't know how to get rid of this awful person. Truly, you feel this is necessary to do. Lovely. What is wrong with our world that people are? Come on. Come on. I don't know, it's hard to tell whether they're still here or not, or whether they feel like they've made their point. I guess my other workaround is for us to just get them out of our view so that we can't see them. I guess let's keep going and see if we can't.
Okay. No worries. So what we were really talking about was this idea of how do you know if something is the best, right? And so if you are a connoisseur of, say, a particular food, because it is around lunchtime where I am, then you know, you could think about that, or you can think about wine, right? Oftentimes that was, but really that is about knowing the best, if that makes sense. And so if you can just take a brief moment and think about what is your, you know, you can think about wine, or you can think about your favorite food and why or why not. So just take a brief moment and think about that. And largely, for most that inquire, it starts with themselves, right? So you started by thinking about what kind of food you like, what kind of food Nick likes, I might absolutely hate, right? So it's gonna start with the person. And when we think about really the best types of learning that we want to elevate and refine, we want to make sure that it's meaningful for the individual. And so that's why I draw in this word connoisseurship. And then what comes into play is the construct of practice. So, for example, you might have thought of a particular food that is temperature agnostic, or that it absolutely, the temperature matters, right? So if my favorite food is ice cream and it's warm, then it's no longer my favorite food, right? It's no longer the best, if that makes sense. You can also think about constructs like the quantity of what you were envisioning as being your favorite, right? If you eat too much or don't have enough, it very well may impact that. But finally, and I know a lot of folks have talked about this, the construct of place or context very much matters. And so as we're sharing ideas from all around the world in this forum that Nick and crew have so gratefully curated for us, it is important when we want to think about elevating the best or being a connoisseur to think about how it plays out in context, right? So the context of a city environment, something is going to play out dramatically different than, for example, where I am in the United States in the northwest corner in rural Idaho. I've lived all around the world, and I can tell you that context really does matter. For example, I was in Shanghai and flew with a group of students. They were high schoolers down to, actually, and Nick, if you would have known this, you could have integrated our Juan Carlos and I's presentations quite well, in that I flew with a group of students down to a place in Malaysia that sounds very similar to what Juan Carlos described on the reserve. And really, place mattered from a standpoint of knowing what was the best. There was no way that we were going to be able to create that virtually for students, that immersive experience. But at the same time, then coming back to the level of connoisseurship, in that construct of the person, you need to really think about what is the meaning building happening for that person. For example, a presentation a little while earlier talked about unintended consequences, right? Of the angle of the camera being much wider than they thought. And so the students, from a standpoint of what they really latched onto and what was meaningful for them, was actually about the vastness of the landscape. When really those that were trying to facilitate the learning, it was something different. So again, those three lenses: you or the person, practice, and place. So Idaho doesn't have a lot of people in the largest sense, but it also is a vast area of wilderness. So if we think about how that plays out in the construct of place and knowing what is the best, individuals can be connoisseurs, but really you need to interact with others to be able to do that. So that's about asking the right questions and getting your answers. Now I'm going to use the word data and results, and sometimes data and results can make people fall asleep, or it can make people get really frustrated, especially with accountability measures and whatnot. But ultimately, if there is no central point to determine what's best, you get what I have put here, right? You get people that are confused. You might get people that are falling asleep, right? People that are off task. And data can look in a lot of different ways, right? Like this is the synthesis of 84 hours of qualitative conversations, right? That was particularly meaningful for a group of people as they came together to decide what was best for themselves, right? So that practice of coming togetherness is really important in knowing what is the best, if that makes sense. Building meaning. Data can be a whole variety of things, and we know that, and I'm not going to bore you with that, right? But here are some examples of how folks have come together and built meaning about what was the best, and they are very much using data. Here's another example. Or here. Or a mix of longitudinal quantitative data and some sketches. But really, when you come down to bringing it from the individual of what you know is best to other people and how they know it's best, or collectively deciding what is best with a group, it very much needs to be design. And I know a lot of folks that are in on this experience or watching this experience later are familiar with design thinking or having a design eye, right? But really, when you think about things that are enjoyable and equitable and empirically informed and engaging, you need to think about design. So thinking about the ways in which students interact with their own research in a project, or how educators know that a project is great, or how scientists are really getting at knowing the best of what they are asking in their question, does come down to design. And the design piece really then gets quite messy, right? When you're talking about, again, what if you're a connoisseur and you start to bring data into a conversation, it changes the conversation, because then all of a sudden you have all these physical artifacts to revolve around the conversation. You can depersonalize conversations, and you can really get out what's the best. or understanding the differences of why one thing might be the best for one person and how it is totally not the same for another. So I'd just like to leave you with this. And then if there's a little bit of time for questions, that's great. And if we don't have time, Nick, that's totally fine. But really, why do you want to be a connoisseur and continue to refine that for yourself? Is you want to be able to align efforts across differences. You want to be able to make new connections across differences. In terms of working with groups, of course, prioritizing goals and intended outcomes is very important. But how do you do that? So making sure that data is within discussions often depersonalizes discussions and allows you to go deeper and really truly understand what is the best. And then structuring dialogue, especially if you're working with groups of people in a finite amount of time, then structuring dialogues with protocols and other measures is obviously very effective. And then finally, just that action steps of defining and assigning. So if we go back to the question that I asked you, which is what are your favorite foods? You all right now could then have a conversation about that. And you could start to get to some really deep, rich, your conversations would be much richer if you're thinking about it from a standpoint of being a connoisseur. So I guess my advocacy slant here is that when you're asking your students to research or you're researching yourself, that if you put yourself in from the perspective of being a connoisseur, it kind of lessens the load and it makes it a bit more rich, if that makes sense.
Oh, thanks, Liz.
No problem.
Unfortunately, I'm going to ignore the chat bar until we get to a break, so I'm not going to know whether people have wonderful questions or insights.
Okay, no worries.
But I'll try to channel the best I can, which is I'm struck by both of what you have both shared and its relationship to the kids in Colombia and in Livingston, Montana, who have kind of taken on this kind of stewardship role of the river, which I'm sure begins as a fairly abstract thing, and then they get very involved in the fine grain detail of it, and they have the potential to find deep and overlapping layers of information, and maybe they begin to discover what the story is to share. And in discovering that story, that's how they can connect to the action that's needed to help improve the quality of the river, or I'm thinking of the habitat in Costa Rica, or habitats around the world that are stressed. And over my life, I've encountered people who feel like it's enough to have just the data. And if I have the data, it's obvious that we need to, preserve this habitat or, expand it or whatever. But I think the story piece comes from when people begin to resonate with that information and see how they can also then become advocates for it. So I don't know, those are things that I see overlap between your two conversations and where we were a couple hours ago.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and you're using that as a connoisseur of the conversations because you're here, right? So, I mean, really, I think it does come down to that, though. Like, I think that that's a nice way to synthesize it is that stories are much richer when they're full of details that are meaningful, right? And so that connoisseurship lens, to me, I think being able to really differentiate and define and distinguish what is the best is quite helpful when you're thinking about elevating various types of learning or experiences that are going to make our world a better place.
I guess another thing that I'm struck by both of your settings is there are many entry points for a young person to be involved in a project, or an adult for that mind to be to be involved in a project, and therefore many expressions of what's known or what's important. And so, I think some of the best projects are built around the concept that you're going to create evidence of what it is that you're exploring or what you think you know in that moment, et cetera. Many iterations of it. And so now you have different things to compare over time, and that we don't limit that to some predetermined end product. There was a school that I worked with that was asking kindergartners to create a book to explain colors and shapes to the pre-K kids that were on the same campus. And that the educators were very stressed by the fact that the kids were not creating books. They were creating puppet shows, they were creating songs, they were creating dances, they were doing all these other things. Not a single one of them was creating a book. And I viewed that as, well, that to me represents the wisdom of these young people, is that they found the best way to express what it is that they know, or how they could best teach these concepts to someone else. And someone later pointed out that, well, if the book was really important to the educator, they could just simply take lots of photographs, organize them, and call it a book,
Right. And that's a perfect example of putting the learner in the at the center, right? So I could have just as easily used in that visual that I start when I said it starts with you. It really starts with the learner, right?
Yeah, sure.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and then Juan Carlos, and do I need to unmute you again? Okay. There you go. So I'm curious, because you have settings where you have on-site scientists and you have groups of educators or groups of students or combinations coming to do citizen scientist work with you. How much of that is driven by what the scientists need, and versus you mentioned students working on projects of their own passion when they're there, but is there this tension of the scientists saying, well, this is kind of nice that you want to do that thing, but really I need more of this information,
And yeah, we do have this issue, because it's interesting to explore and to be there at that time with the students. We have the scientist there, and he has his project and he needs his data, and we have like the students comment, why don't we take this one, or why is this done this way? And the scientist is like, because I need it for my project, right? So we do have this small conflict. Usually the conflict inspires the student a little. The nice thing about our program is residential, and we stay there at Pacuare Reserve with each group's 3 nights and 4 days. So they're able to go with the scientist and help the scientist in what he needs to. But then we create the time for the students to do their own project. So we're gonna help them think about their research questions, to help them figure out the methods they're gonna use. And then we help them go to the field and take the data that they want to. So we have in our program, I think we have both components, where they see a project that is already running, and it's been running like that for 20 years, and we're going to be part of that project. But we as well give a chance for them to do their own thing. And they can do the monkeys, they can do ants, they can do flowers, they can do social, because there's a lot of people, well, not a lot, but there's some people living there, and they're from different countries. So sometimes you're expecting them to do a monkey project or an ant project, and they're like, no, I want to do a social thing. I want to ask them what do they think about the Costa Rican food, because it's different. And I don't know, things like that. So we have like those both components that make it switches.
So two things, and I'll come back to Liz. Have you ever had a student who comes and has some very divergent thinking about what should be done there, and it has a scientist say, oh, I hadn't thought of that? Has that ever kind of occurred, or or are they almost always absorbed into the scientist framework?
No, we do have the students chip in the projects. We have different research projects that they can get involved, and we do activities where the students brainstorm what they know about it and what they want to know. And on the want to know, we let them answer their questions by themselves. They go to the scientists and ask what their interest and they want to know more about, and this create conversation between the scientists and the students and enrich the project. And there's things that have been really interesting there.
So, and before I get to this, so the follow-up of that is, are there students who, whether they come only one time or they come multiple times, who leave with such a passion that you hear that, oh, they went on and got a research degree that has fostered a stewardship project somewhere else in the world? I mean, do you stay in touch with the people who come?
We do stay in touch, not as much as we want. We have a lot of students that pass and go, but we have students that I know that there's still communication with us, that come to Costa Rica, then they went to the Yellowstone program, and then they go to the PSG ranch in Missoula, and now they are biologists doing their own research. We have students, local students that are now turtle scientists. They got hooked on the turtle, and they're scientists now of that. We have other group of students that they took their masters or their university studies, and then they are now our educators. So we have a couple of instructors this year that they are biologists, and they have their studies in biology, but they want to teach the students and they want to inspire students as well. So they have their own science project, but they work with us as educators as well. And that's pretty interesting too.
And I know your situation is different, Liz, but those two different questions about, do students contribute divergent thinking that helps a group think differently, or have you seen kids who are motivated by these conversations and lead to something?
You know, I think that really what I'm thinking about when you ask that question, really, so I'm going to kind of answer your question, I guess. I'm going to be kind of political here, I guess, if it makes sense, and not really answer your question, but is the tension between self and others, right? So personal meaning versus collective meaning, right? And I think that's that, like, sort of public versus private. When is learning private, and when is it the deepest? When it's private, right? Like when we ask students to reflect in writing, for example, sometimes we get incredibly rich things, right, that really bring the learning forward. Whereas if you think about public, obviously public is very helpful in a lot of ways, right, to help individuals calibrate socially what's sort of acceptable, non-acceptable, accessible, or you know, in a way like that having a public audience really oftentimes allows folks for their individual thinking to jump to the next level, right? So I kind of think about it like that, if that makes sense.
Well, I've been reflecting on this entire day about how we've been kind of cultivating these new connections between people, and each of you become a new resource. I'll be curious to see who reaches out to each of you after this and says, how can we be involved? How could we extend this conversation? And Gabrielle and Frank and I have been having a couple conversations about what could this crazy 24-hour thing look like in another iteration. And one of the ones that rattles around in my head is, what if the day begins with some sort of connection of young people working on a common project or multiple common projects, and basically instead of us listening to each other, we would just periodically peer into their conversations and say, what do you know so far, or what are you curious about, or where do you think this will go? That, you know, that type of thing. And you know, there's probably lots of different ways that we could do this, but I'll be glad if I hear afterwards that people have been reaching out to each other and wanting to learn more about what everybody's doing out in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
I've been only feeling a need to kind of prematurely wrap up a few minutes early, just because the last few sessions were running up to the last minute, and then it makes for an awkward transition to the next one. And of course, being Zoom bombed adds to the discomfort in this last hour. But I'm glad we persisted, and well, my big takeaway from this is absolutely you force everybody to enter their name and email address as a gateway of coming into the call. And that probably scares off a certain number of crazy interruptions to things. So thank you all so much. And I'm gonna unmute. I'm gonna save this one here in a moment, and then just to confirm that we have Caroline, Rick, and Emmy, as well as Kathy, and I'm forgetting everybody's names, coming up, and Frank's going to facilitate that one, and then we'll be back after that with Jim Bentley down at Folks Elementary School. So I will set up this next call with Rick and Emmy and Kathy and everybody, and pass that on to Frank. So thank you again, and we'll be back at the top of the hour.